Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the security of AWS. So not security in AWS, which we're going to cover a bit later. We're also going to cover the shared responsibility model. We're going to talk about the security of AWS. So this leads on to the question, how does AWS secure their stuff? So to find out how, we need to go to aws.amazon.com/security. And there's a couple of white papers on that site, but the main one that we want to read is Introduction to AWS Security Processes. Okay, so I'm on aws.amazon.com/security. Now, you can see here there are different tabs, so we can learn about cloud security, penetration testing, we can search for security bulletins, we can add or have a look at all the different resources, we can see how AWS is compliant and what partners that they work with. You can also scroll down and go down to here to the security platform. Here we can read about infrastructure security, DDoS mitigation, data encryption, inventory and configuration, monitoring and logging, identity and access control, and penetration testing. Let's go up to the top and just go over to resources. And if we scroll down, there's a whole bunch of developer documents. You can have a read through them, but to be honest, we're going to cover off most of that stuff in the course anyway. But in here is the white paper, and this is the really important one. This is Introduction to AWS Security Processes. This is the one white paper that you should read prior to going into your exam. The rest of this course is basically going to cover off what's in these white papers essentially. So we're going to go over and do an overview of AWS security from a whole bunch of different services. But this is definitely the one that you want to read. So what it covers off is things like how AWS essentially secures the cloud. So we're going to go through this in this lecture. We're going to look at things like physical and environmental security, business continuity management, AWS access, secure design principles, change management, etc. So let's start with the physical and environmental security. So as we all know, AWS consists of regions, and inside each region you have 2 or more availability zones, and availability zones are made up of multiple, basically data centers. So how does AWS secure these data centers? Well, from a physical and environmental security point of view, they have a whole number of different things. And I don't know if you've ever been to a data center before. It really depends on what background you come from. I'm lucky enough to have been an infrastructure architect, and I have been to one of the UK's most secure data centers. It's actually a data center that the UK government, hosts a lot of the critical infrastructure in, and it is amazing. I mean, it has 3-meter high fencing all around the facility. It has sensors on the fence to detect if anyone's trying to climb it. It has razor wire at the top. It looks like something out of Jurassic Park. It has A and B power feeds that come from different areas of the grid. So if one power supply company fails, you've got a feed from another power supply company. If both fail, you then have it has something like 1 million liters of diesel on site, as well as a whole bunch of different diesel generators, enough to power the entire data center for 48 hours. So it is really amazing. Data centers are like a fascinating thing. If you ever get the chance to do a data center tour for someone, I'd definitely go in and do it. So data centers, they're pretty much all very, very similar in terms of how you protect them. So Amazon have obviously fire detection and suppression. So if there is a fire, Amazon, will basically be able to put that fire out. Power, there's normally 2 feeds. So there's going to be an A feed and a B feed. They monitor climate and temperature so that, that there's no risks of your servers or data halls overheating. They've got a management team there. So the data center that I was talking about, actually the security consists of all ex-soldiers, all ex-Gurkhas, as it happens. So it's quite interesting. But obviously the AWS team are going to have really good management around it. They're going to track who's coming in and who's going out, and they have to have a very valid reason for why they're coming in and out. Typically, Amazon wouldn't do data center tours for customers. They don't do that at all. Companies like Rackspace, they used to. I don't know if they still do, but Rackspace used to do data center tours for customers. So they are quite interesting. So it really depends on the provider. And then storage device decommissioning. Now, when public cloud first came out, there was a bit of a security breach in that some providers weren't zeroing the disks before they were using them again. So essentially what would happen is you could go in and provision a public cloud server, and then runs some tools on that server to recover the information that it was previously on that server. So that what public cloud providers started doing was they started zeroing the disks. Now it's a standard industry practice to zero the disk and then to decommission it by basically shredding it or smashing it up. And there's a famous photo that was shown at reInvent a couple of years ago of it, what looked like sand, but it actually turned out to be a decommissioned hard drive. So AWS do put a lot of time and effort and money into physical and environmental security, as you would expect. They also have business continuity management. So this essentially is, like an operations center that monitors things like availability, incident responses. They then do company-wide executive reviews when there has been an incident, and they try and communicate issues out to customers, both through the service health dashboard, as well as what actually caused the problem. And Amazon does have, outages. It really does. We've had 3 major outages in the last 3 years. We've had a Lambda outage, we've had an S3 outage, we've had a DynamoDB outage. All these outages actually tend to occur in US East 1 for some reason. It's probably because it's, where they, release all their services first. But you should always design for failure. I mean, you should know that already from the Solutions Architect course. Always assume something is going to go wrong and have a backup plan. So from a network security point of view, they have secure network architecture, secure access points. If you think about Amazon, everything is available as a public API, so they've got to go in and secure those access points. Transmission protections is things like SSL certificates. So, basically every time you try and upload something to S3, you're going to try and use the HTTPS address instead of, obviously HTTP. Every time you access the console, that's secured through HTTPS. Amazon actually segregate their corporate network. So the Amazon.com network is not on the same network as AWS. It's completely separate networks. So if an Amazon.com employee needs to go in and access something on the AWS website, they have to do it via a bastion. Obviously, Amazon have a fault-tolerant design, so they have multiple availability zones inside multiple regions, and they do a whole bunch of network monitoring and protection, including DDoS mitigation, and that you get automatically through AWS Shield, but you can also do an advanced DDoS mitigation, which I think costs about $3,000 a month, but gives you a whole bunch of more features as well. So when AWS users do access resources inside AWS, so production environments, the accounts are reviewed every 90 days and audited. So if you haven't actually gone in and used that account to access AWS resources, it will automatically, you'll lose access, and then you have to apply for access again. When AWS hire people, they do extensive criminal background checks on all their staff where the law permits them to be able to do that. And then the credentials policy is just around Amazon's password credentials. So they require really complex passwords, and they require that it gets changed every 90 days. So let's talk about secure design principles. AWS's development process follows secure software development best practices. So basically, they have a formal design reviews by the AWS security team. They do threat modeling, and they do completion of risk assessment. Static code analysis tools are run as a part of the standard build process, and all deployed software undergoes reoccurring penetration testing performed by carefully selected industry experts. So they have really good secure design principles. In terms of change management, they do routine, emergency, and configuration changes to the AWS infrastructure, and it's all authorized, logged, tested, and approved and documented in accordance with industry norms for similar systems. Updates to AWS's infrastructure are done to minimize any impact on customers and their use of AWS services. And AWS always communicate to customers via email or through the service health dashboard when the service is likely to be adversely affected. And then finally, onto software. They have a systematic approach to managing change so that changes to customer impacting services are thoroughly reviewed, tested, approved, and well communicated before being deployed. And you can go through that white paper, have a quick read through it. Definitely read it the day before sitting your certified security specialty exam, because it will really, really help you. But it does beg the question, why should we trust AWS? Like, why should we actually trust that this white paper is true? How do we know that it's true? And the answer to that is that AWS undergo a whole bunch of different compliance and security audits from a whole bunch of different bodies who will attest that AWS is meeting, their standards. Now, the big one to note from here is ISO 27001. That is by far globally recognized as one of the most, sort of stringent standards. The other thing to look at is the PCI DSS. So Amazon is certified to a PCI DSS level 1, which means that you can have literally millions or even billions of dollars go through their platform. Of course, that's their underlying core infrastructure is PCI DSS compliant. The software that you build on AWS still has to undergo its own audit. It's called a gap audit. So you need to, go through and get a person to do that audit. So don't just assume that because AWS's infrastructure is PCI DSS compliant, that your website will automatically be PCI DSS compliant as well. But the reason, like I said, you can trust AWS is it's, undergoes all of these different compliance programs. Another one to note is HIPAA, especially in the United States. Well, only in the United States. HIPAA is the regulations that govern how people who have your medical records, how they treat and guard your data. So HIPAA is another important one as well. And if you're interested in finding out whether or not they're compliant to a particular standard, perhaps there's something in your country, like for example in the UK, do you want to find out whether or not they're compliant for GovCloud, go check out aws.amazon.com/compliance. So what are my exam tips? Well, basically just going into the exam, remember the different security controls around physical and environmental security, business continuity management, network security, AWS access, secure design principles, and change management. My big exam tip is to remember that the corporate Amazon.com network is completely segregated from the AWS network. And if any Amazon.com employees want to go into the AWS network to deploy, new services or products, they have to go and get special permission. And there's a whole bunch of internal reviews that are done when seeking the permission. And as soon as you don't log in for 90 days, that permission is automatically revoked. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.